Prime Minister Mark Carney has a meeting this morning with U.S. President Donald Trump. It's taking place at the G7 summit in Alberta. This is Air Force One arriving yesterday. Now, this is Trump's first visit to Canada since repeatedly saying that the country should become the 51st state. Trump, of course, also stormed out of the last G7 summit that Canada hosted. That was in 2018. The meeting comes as Carney and Trump are trying to resolve the economic spat caused by Trump's tariffs. Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand has described the talks as sensitive because of the deep integration of both economies. So to talk more about this morning and what to expect from the G7 is former Conservative Foreign Affairs Minister Peter Mackay. Peter, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us this morning. Let's start with what we just talked about. Mark Carney, Donald Trump meeting on the sideline. We've already seen the meeting at the White House. But what should we have? What expectations do you think it's fair for Canadians to have of what could come from this meeting between the two leaders today?
Well, interestingly, I think officials are trying to downplay high expectations. The hope is that there'll be some progress made on these trade tariffs that dramatically impact the Canadian economy, particularly that in Ontario with aluminum and steel and autos. And so hopefully there will be at least a movement of the dial. But there is so many other issues that are flooding the zone, so to speak. What's happened between Iran and Israel, the ongoing invasion of Ukraine by the Russians, lots of other geopolitics, including in the South China Sea, the presence of Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. That is also a bit of a sideshow. So there are many, many moving parts at this meeting, but clearly for Prime Minister Carney, getting some movement on trade relief for Canada has to be near the top of his list.
Now, of course, you've been on the inside of these sort of summits in the past. It was G8, I suppose, at the time when you were Foreign Affairs and part of the Harper government. What's it actually like on the inside when these actually meetings take place, when you consider all of the geopolitical, for example, items that you've mentioned here? What is it like when that is hitting, the rubber hits the road at these meetings effectively?
Well, a lot of the legwork, so to speak, is done beforehand. So preparation of communiques. I know that the last one, there was a 2,000-page communique that went out. That's not going to happen this time. Again, in keeping with downplaying expectations, there's going to be individual sort of joint statements made between countries that come out of bilateral meetings. And so that differs quite markedly. I can't honestly say there has ever been so many crises on the front burner as we're seeing today as the leaders are gathering in Kananaskis. So it differs in that perhaps the consequences are much, much higher. The Prime Minister is new in the position, so that works both for and against him. It gives him a fresh start on some of these relationships, although I note that there are only two world leaders there that would have been at the last meeting. There's been a number of elections and a lot of other players coming to Alberta to take part. So the Prime Minister has a chance to make a massive, massive impact here, or very little, depending on the outcome.
Right. Also, one of the first foreign leaders beyond the G7 that Prime Minister Carney invited was, of course, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He's going to be there. We've seen how things have been sort of going back and forth between Zelensky and Trump. What do you think we should see on the Ukrainian side of things this week?
Well, hopefully the effort to continue to have the United States engaged. It seems that the president is quite distracted and even a little bored with what's happening there. That's terrible news for everyone, but most notably for Zelensky. But a re-engagement, or at least a commitment on his part to continue to support Ukraine. That is, of course, the central issue for the NATO Secretary General, who will be present, and as it has been for the other members of the G7. I mean, it seems very much like this is a G6+1, and the effort has to be to do no harm. That is, to have the president engage and not leave in a huff, as he did the last time Canada hosted in Charlevoix.
Yeah, it seems like Trump management almost versus, global management.
I think that's right. I mean, some people had expressed concerns about grizzly bears around Kananaskis. It feels a little bit like that, not to be, to make light of it, but don't lock eyes, don't make any sudden movements, and don't get mauled is the advice, I think, for most world leaders.
Okay, you know what? Let's leave it on that note then. That is former Foreign Affairs and Defense Minister Peter Mackay. Peter, we always appreciate your time here on Breakfast. Thanks so much for joining us.